Hello, welcome to Real Person Reviews. I'm Sam, and I'm a real person. And today I want to talk to you about Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. And for the stuff up front, aside from the fact that you can check out that written review, linked in the description if you would like, I wanted to say that I've played this and beaten it. Unlike the first game, which you should check out that review of if you haven't or aren't familiar with the first Castlevania yet. But unlike that one, I actually was able to beat Castlevania 2. I've beaten it on the NES, and I've beaten it on the 3DS Virtual Console. So I've beaten it a few times. So I have a better idea of what I'm talking about here, at least in terms of my street cred, my gamer cred. Or whatever. So yeah, the footage you're gonna see is probably from off my 3DS, so that's why it looks the way that it looks. But that's pretty much all I have to preface it, I guess. So, if you're ready, then I'm ready too. So, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Basically, this plot, which the game sort of tells you. And as you play, you kind of figure out the rest of it too, even if you don't necessarily own the booklet or whatever, is that it kind of picks up after the first game. Dracula is dead, but unfortunately the Belmont family has a curse on it. So it is up to you, Simon Belmont, to try to lift the curse. And in order to do that, what you have to do is go around and find all of the remains of Dracula. You have to collect all of his remains, which I guess have been split apart and are now guarded inside of these mansions all around Transylvania. And you have to find all those remains, bring them to Dracula's castle, or Casltevania as it were, and then you have to use those to resurrect Dracula, and then defeat Dracula, and then supposedly the curse goes away. That's the idea. Alright. Well, the basic gameplay of this is pretty similar. You have pretty much the same controls as you did in the previous game. A lot of the look is very similar as well. But the kind of game this is a lot different. It's not a straightforward linear platformer. Instead, it's more of an adventure game. In fact, you could even call it one of the earliest Metroidvania games, along with the original Metroid on the NES. You start off in a town, and you can go around the town, talk to some townsfolk, you can buy some stuff from them, and then you can just go out and start exploring. And that's generally what the towns are for, is going around, buying some stuff, talking to some people who will sometimes give you hints, like telling you where to go next or where to find things. Sometimes people tell you the truth. Sometimes people tell you half-truths because they want to help you, but they also don't want to incur the wrath of Dracula. There are those who will just tell you flat-out lies, and some people just, won't help you. They just won't. They're essentially useless. So, getting information from them isn't super reliable, but that's really the only thing you have for a long time. And, unless you use the internet, you could, at this point, use the internet, I guess. Some of the things you can buy are, you can buy, some consumables, you can also buy some sub-weapons, and you can buy some better whips, which will make you stronger. There's also usually churches in the town. If you go into a church, you can go and heal up your health. That's how you do that. Pretty quickly you'll find that then you have to travel out of town. You go into the wilderness. There's all kinds of places, there's forests and swamps and mountains and graveyards, all kinds of stuff. And going around different parts is there's some forks in the road, aside from some secrets where you have to do special things in order to get to these other parts of the game from certain parts of the game. Most of the general forks in the road are just going to be exiting a screen from either the top or the bottom of either the left or the right of the screen, and going certain ways is going to make you go on different routes. When you're out in the wilderness, you're going to find a lot of monsters out there, and you fight them pretty much like you fought them before, with your whip and some sub-weapons if you have any. When you kill enemies, they drop. Oftentimes, will drop hearts. There's like a little heart. There's a half of a big heart, and then there's a full big heart, giving you more and more hearts. And what this does is it does a few different things. One thing is that collecting hearts just directly goes into your heart count, which in this game is used as currency to buy those things from the merchants. Another thing it does is that actually getting hearts will increase your experience points. Getting enough experience points gets you up a level, and then every time you level up, you fully heal yourself, and you get a little bit of extra maximum health. It only works in certain sections. Basically, because you start at level 0, and basically at certain points, if you're trying to level up, you can only get so much experience in certain areas until your level caps for that area, and then you have to go to the next area of progression to up your level more by this method. The other thing hearts are used for is that almost all, I think except for a few of a couple of your sub-weapons, they'll take a certain amount of hearts to use. So that, again, that's kind of like the first Casltevania with those. And then as you're exploring, you're basically looking for these mansions. When you get into them, there are usually a lot of enemies around there, and they're kind of mazy. And when you're in these mansions, you basically have the goal of trying to find the merchants in the mansion that will sell you an oak stake, which you use like a sub-weapon. But you only get them one at a time, so... Oh, birds are going by. So, you can get one, and if you use it, it doesn't hurt any enemies or anything. You only use it for a later part of the mansion, so, just keep that in mind, I guess. Once you get to the end of the mansion, you'll find an orb, and then you use the oak stake on the orb, and then that reveals the part of Dracula's remains. You get that, and then it'll give you some kind of special ability if you equip it. And you can equip, there's like a menu, like there's some crystals you can equip, or one of the body parts on one part, and your sub-weapons on the other part. So you can kind of customize yourself a little bit that way, depending on what the situation calls for. And that's all. There's also breakable walls. Usually, pretty early on, you can get the holy water, which I won't spoil the other sub-weapons for you, but the holy water is something that costs no hearts, but you use it to do things like find false walls or floors, and also to break certain blocks. And a lot of times when you break blocks, you can find some, secret rooms or something, but a lot of times you'll be finding, at least in the mansions, you'll be finding a lot of these hint books, which tell you how to, I think there's 13 clues or something, but they tell you how to defeat Dracula, or they're clues on how to defeat Dracula, basically. And these are the only things you can really trust. They're more reliable than, the people who you don't know if you can trust or not. Once you get all of the pieces, go through all those mansions, get all the remains, you go into Dracula's castle, you resurrect Dracula, and if you beat him, you win, and then you get one of a few set endings, depending on how fast you beat the game. The only other thing I guess I didn't really mention is that dying, if you run out of health and die, you will respawn right where you were, and you'll lose a life. If you run out of lives, you get a game over, which you can either choose to continue, you'll start there again without any of your hearts, and I think it takes away your experience too. at least the experience you were gaining towards your level. Uh, and if you choose password, it'll do pretty much the same thing, except whenever you put in the password later, that's when it'll do it. And that's basically how you save in the game. There's no save files, but you can at least have passwords here, I guess. That's pretty much the game. Except for, one other thing I guess I kind of glossed over. There's a day-night cycle, which I don't know how many minutes it is, but every so many minutes, as long as you're not in a mansion or inside of a building or anything, you're on the clock, and it'll turn from day to night or from night to day. At night, you can't go into any of the buildings in the towns. And there are also enemies in the towns at that point. And all the enemies in the wilderness are now twice as strong, and they do have better drops when they're that strong, but they're stronger. That is essentially the game. And it's really fun for me, honestly. It's a game that's really interesting to see if you like the whole Metroidvania thing, to see some of the beginnings of that, especially like with the later Casltevania games that took a lot of these ideas and like expanded upon them. It's cool to see that they started as early as the second game in the series. And like it still looks great. It still has awesome music. It's kind of cool to have a more of an adventure experience, yet they managed to make it almost a different genre, but keep the same basic control scheme. And I think that's really interesting. It still feels very Castlevania, despite having such a big departure from what the first one was doing in a lot of those ways. And being able to get those different abilities with the different body parts and having all the different sub-weapons just selectable like that, it was kind of cool to sort of customize yourself a bit. The leveling up thing was cool because it made it neat to be like, I'm killing enemies not just because I need to get hearts to buy a thing, or not just because they're in the way I need to kill them. I'm also kind of doing it so I can, level up and get stronger, so it makes the game a little easier. Like, that's cool. There's a lot of cool ideas. Even the day-night mechanic is a cool idea. So it's a very ambitious game, and it's a game that I think is very interesting. It's something you can actually, if you don't necessarily like it, you can at least respect it, and be intrigued by it. And it's once you know what you're doing, it's pretty fun. Which that's kind of the problem, is that figuring out what to do is a fucking pain in the ass. Some of the things that you're trying to do, like listening to people, sucks because you never know who's telling you the truth or not. There are some things that, even though I knew what to do in the game already, even knowing what I'm supposed to do, hearing people have hints about these things, were like, how was I gonna guess that off of that? Like, I had to. Some of them were a pretty big stretch to make them fit what you actually have to do. And some of these are things that you might not even just figure out with trial and error, because, like, how would you think to do specifically that, and at for as long as you need to do it, or at the exact place, and it's so hard to know. It's ridiculous. So yeah, a lot of that is bullshit. Some of it's from poor translation, and some of it's because it was meant to be really cryptic, and because they designed a few of these things, a few of the little puzzles or secrets that, when I say secrets, I mean things you don't really know, you just have to figure out in order to progress in the fucking game. They make some of those so, like, impossible to just figure out, or at least improbable to figure out, on your own, that, like, it's ridiculous. It's practically inexcusable, and the only saving grace to it is that nowadays you can look it up on the internet, whereas back when it came out, you would just be like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do, and none of my friends know what the fuck to do, so I guess I can't beat it. I just don't know, and you just never beat it, and that sucks. That would suck. There's no map. There's no fucking map in this goddamn game to see where you're going, so it's hard to track where you've been. Things don't look super distinct. Some things look kind of distinct, but not all the things do. Some parts wrap around with the world map, and sometimes they're dead ends. And I don't know, like the whole thing of like losing, like when you die, losing your experience and hearts and stuff is annoying because then you have to start over and like grind all that shit up again. And also, this game does this weird thing where you want to kill things and level up, so you want to kind of grind and take some time to do that. You also want to get hearts so you can buy better, consumables and buy the better whips. And so you're stronger, so it makes the game easier. And it seems to be encouraging you to spend more time, get the good shit, and make the game easier on yourself. And then at the end of the game, it's like, oh, you're too slow, asshole. You get the shitty ending. You don't really know it's the shitty ending unless you know about the other endings, I guess. But that still is kind of weird that they would encourage you to go towards the worst ending. That's strange to me. And also, I think they could have made it a little more difficult in terms of actually being tough to play, like skill-wise, not just like confusing bullshit difficult of like trying to figure out a super cryptic, not obvious thing to do. That, like the mansions specifically, they should have had a boss in every mansion. They don't have one in every mansion, and they should have been more difficult to get through the mansions. The mansions all should have been pretty linear, difficult, like, things to go through, and then as soon as you beat it and got the part, they should get you the fuck out. They also have the famous typo, where for every fucking body part that you get, it says you now possess Dracula's whatever it is. Possess. So, yeah, if you look at the written review and you see the word possess in there, that's on purpose. This game is certainly full of some faults because of its ambitious nature. But even though there's all those problems with Castlevania 2, it's still really fun. I think it's it's not as worth playing as the first one. It's nowhere near as good design-wise, and it's not as classic or anything. I think if you're a fan of the first one, I think you should probably check it out just to see where they went with it. And especially if you're a fan of like those later Castlevanias where it was like, oh, like they're this kind of like, this is the predecessor to that style of Castlevania. I think you'll be interested to see where they kind of started doing some of that stuff. But I don't know. And for NES, fans, it's okay. It's not a must-have or anything like that. It's one of those where it's like, if you see it and you can find it for a decent price somewhere, it might be worth checking out, I would say this is maybe worth $15 to $20 is what I would say, because it's still a lengthy enough experience. It's still fun. It's just that it's also going to be pretty frustrating, and you're probably going to have to use the internet. But if you're okay with doing that, and you don't mind actually playing it, then after, with doing some of that stuff, it's still a fun time. I think it's still an experience worth having. So what do you guys think? Do you like Castlevania or Castlevania 2 better? Leave that in the comments. And what did you think of Castlevania 2? Because I've heard a lot of people hate it. And I don't. But, what are your feelings on it? That would also just, in general, that would be fun to see in the comments. If you guys want to have a chat. You can also, again, if you want to check out the written review, that's in the description. And look, I'd love to make some kind of weird teaser thing of like, hey, we're going to do Castlevania 3 next. But, like, I don't have it. And if I did it, I'm guessing that it would be even more embarrassing than me reviewing the first one. Because it would just be like, remember how I couldn't beat the first Castlevania? This one is harder. From what I hear, everyone says it's harder. I don't think I'd get far enough to even have a decent opinion on it, but maybe someday. Who knows? I mean, Dracula's curse just doesn't like to stay down, as we've seen, and we'll probably be seeing again sometime. If Konami wants to, like, make a game again or something. I don't know.